right, welcome everybody. Welcome to Cybersecurity and our best practices for businesses version here in October. With me today is Brad Leonard from our BOS Insurance Agency. We've also got Matt Stark with our Business Services Department and our Chief Technology Officer, Neil Gebhardt. My name's Justin Knoedler, and I'm also in our Business Services Department. And the reason we are here today is to talk about cybersecurity, fraud, best practices. Why we do this is it's strictly an educational seminar that we want to do as often as regular as we can. Most importantly, to protect our customers and to protect the bank. And we're going to go through some topics today. If you have any questions, you've got the ability to put those questions in the chat. So type those in and we'll get to those near the end. The topics today are going to be what we're seeing currently in the fraud world, current trends, the best practices, policies, and procedures that you yourself can use to protect your businesses and your financial assets, as well as help your employees, to educate your employees to protect your assets as well. We're going to go through some products and services for protection, and we're just going to dive right in. So I think first on the docket today is Matt Stark from our Business Services Department.
Yes, thank you, Justin. Welcome, everybody. I just want to start off with what we're seeing as a bank and around the community. Just to preface this, we do belong to a Central Illinois fraud group, and we kind of share a lot of the experiences we're having because this is a community problem, not only here, but across the country and elsewhere. So what we try to do is get together, see trends, that way we can combat fraud the best we can. And this is one of the ways to do it as well. If you listen to the morning radio shows and things like that, you may hear some different radio hosts talking about fraud, best practices with your passwords and things like that. So just want to let you guys know where we're coming from on this. So what we are seeing, we've got a fraud breakdown here over the past 3 years. And if you take a look at the numbers here, ACH, external transfers, wires, we're all familiar with these things, and there is fraud in those areas. But our biggest concern and the thing that's happening the most right now is check fraud. So I really want to dive into check fraud, why there's check fraud, and what you can do to help combat that without forgetting about the other ACH, wire, email, things like that. So we'll dive right into why checks. The big thing, technology is kind of a twofold, it's kind of a double-edged sword here. So on the one hand, increased security surrounding IT, along with multi-factor, dual approval, and other tools has helped reduce ACH and wire fraud, which in turn has moved fraudsters toward checks. So while checks go back to a more traditional payment method, the technology to deposit, cash, and spoof checks has enhanced and makes it easier for the fraudsters, while detection has become tougher. And then we kind of move into the volume. So a lot of volume of checks out there, a lot of volume of fraud, and the fraudsters thrive on that volume. So if there's thousands and thousands of checks and there's fraud going on, small businesses, big businesses, it's hard to keep up with, and the fraudsters know that. The ease has become very easy with smartphones and other technology to just take a picture of a check. They don't actually have to steal the check anymore. So the original item may clear without the business even knowing, so that there's no suspicion there. And then, another thing that they're doing, mobile deposit has made it easy. Now, you do have to have a bank account that you've hacked to be able to utilize that, but we are seeing instances where people don't know they're dealing with a fraudster, and they become what we refer to as a mule, to where they're moving the money for the fraudster unknowingly, or there's a romance scam or something like that. Next, we've got timeliness. We understand for small businesses and large businesses facing staffing issues that it's hard to reconcile on a regular basis. Monthly reconcilement just isn't good enough anymore when you're dealing with check fraud. Banks typically have anywhere from 24 to 48 hours in order to return an item to ensure that it does come back to the account and the funds aren't gone. And the fraudsters know that as well. They know about the time frame. They know what systems are in place with banks, with companies, as far as accounting software. So they're very smart, they're very creative, and they're really hitting the industry hard.
I would add that they also know, the fraudsters also know the check cashing limits. So, they're reproducing checks, they're whitewashing the name on the check. So to our imaging software that we have in our system, it's very hard to detect. And so what you can do as a customer is keep monitoring those checks and making sure that the payee actually matches who you meant it to pay. And so, yeah, like Matt said, they are very creative. They're staying on top of their game. Banks will do things and change caching limits and change policies and procedures just to stay ahead of it. But they've got people that are always keeping an eye on those things.
Right. And, that leads into the human element, human interaction. So a couple of things with humans is if a check has been whitewashed, the payee changed, or whatever the case is, it's as simple as a human making a mistake at a check cashing facility or not caring. Some people may not care. Their job is to cash checks and they get a paycheck for that and they're not too worried about it. So, and we'll talk about products a little bit later, but unless your business is utilizing services such as Positive Pay that we'll hit on, it takes a human to catch the fraud at this point. So human interaction is a big thing, and that kind of goes into our email, ACH, wire fraud, where they're spoofing things and humans are falling for these deceptive tactics as well. And then lastly, consequences. This goes back to volume. When you have so much volume of fraud, it's very hard for banks, authorities, you as small businesses or big businesses to keep up and catch these criminals. So if they know that and they're not getting caught, the risk versus the reward is there, and they're gonna continue to do so until we can catch up. So what can you do? Stop writing checks. I have there as a question mark. Is that feasible? Probably not. But what we can do is work to reduce the amount of checks that we are writing. Think about using services such as direct deposit payroll, using ACH and wires for vendor payments. That way you can avoid those checks sitting out in mailboxes or getting in the wrong hands. Accepting debit and credit cards or paying with debit and credit cards. There's a lot of tools out there and easy ways to collect payment outside of writing a traditional check. And, sidebar, that helps with cash flow as well. Those are more immediate funds for you versus a check you have to reconcile and make sure that did clear. You may have to put a stop payment void, things like that. One thing we encourage our business customers and their vendors is to get lockable mailboxes. If you're in a rural area or in a suburban area, wherever the case may be, if you just have a mailbox, a lot of times fraudsters are just stealing the checks straight out of the mailbox and going and either creating new checks or whitewash them and using those checks. Bank reconcilement. We touched on that a little bit. Monthly's really not good enough anymore. We really need to do daily reconcilement. And along with what Justin said, looking at the images to make sure that it is the check that you wrote, you signed, and even looking at the back of it to make sure the endorsement looks okay. And lastly, utilize bank services. We touched on Positive Pay, and we're going to go through those a little bit later on when Justin speaks again on some of the other things that we have in place here that will help automate and help reduce the amount of time that a small business may have to use to combat check fraud. And with that, I'm going to pass over here to Brad to talk a little bit about some of the things that they need as far as cyber security and insurance.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So one of the most important things that you can do from a crime perspective, when I say crime, that means check fraud, employee fraud, anything to protect you internally, is they always ask you to have dual signatures. On the really robust policies, they ask you to have 2 signatures, so there's not just one person controlling all the funds. And that's just good to have a second set of eyes every single time for it to clear. Like Matt already alluded to, have a weekly audit. Just reconcile every week just to make sure that everything is panning out. If you do it once a month, there can be a lot of damage done in that little 20 to 25 days that you weren't reconciling, and it can be very costly. The other thing that we need to always consider is having a monoline by itself, standalone crime policy. If you can do that, a lot of companies have a false sense of, well, I have a crime policy in my package with my carrier. And unbeknownst to you, there's a lot of hoops you should be jumping through in order for that policy even to react. If you don't have dual signatures and you don't have reconciling every single week and you don't have multi-factor authentication and all these steps in place, they're not going to pay the claim. So if you get a specific policy, crime policy and cyber policy, you should have proper coverages because you're going to have to go through that application process and you're going to be on the same page. Now they're going to charge you accordingly based on your risk transfer, but that's something a business should always consider having in place as its own, if you can afford it, its own crime policy and own cyber policy separate from your package. It's just going to be check a lot more boxes and protect you, not completely, never can be completely covered, but as much as humanly possible. And then one last thing, right now, 82% of breaches are because of human error. It's not because these tech guys are just geniuses. It's about duping that end employee. They just want to get the job done, like Matt said, and it's all because of human error, 82% of the time. So keep that in mind. Make sure you continuously train your employees because that's where the breach is going to happen. That's where that firewall really needs to be. And then next, I think we go to Neil on the email fraud and employee deception. Matt?
Yeah, before we get into that, I want to see any questions at all in the chat. Okay, we'll keep rolling along here. As Brad said about human error, we talked a lot about checks and how that fraud is very prevalent right now. But we don't want to forget about fraud and employee deception, and a lot of that is generated via email. So one of the things we see on the business services side, whether you're sending payments, getting payments, what's happening is there's a change in the method of payment or final destination. And essentially what that means is someone's intercepted an email at some point, and what they're trying to do is say, hey, we didn't receive payment. Here's the new account information. Please send it here. Now, whether that's via ACH, check, or wire, that's really what they're trying to get you to do is, and we've actually seen 2 or 3 instances in the last couple of weeks, really, of people whose emails have been hacked. They intercept the original email. They're saying, hey, we need to send payment here. So it's very dangerous. And we got a couple of red flags, and I'll kind of read through these. But the big thing that I want to touch on is when this happens, if there's any sort of change in payment, call your customer or vendor. Pick up the phone, give them a call, ask them if they sent the email, ask them if the information is correct. And you want to use a number that you have on file. You never want to use the number that came from the email. You also don't want to reply to the email because you could be interacting with the fraudster themselves, and you could be going down the rabbit hole, and they'll be leading you on and trying to gain your trust. So those are some big things that we see as far as ACH wires, even checks. If they say we haven't received your payment via check, let's go ahead and do an ACH or a wire because we need that immediately. Otherwise, your services will be turned off, whatever the case is. So it's just something to keep an eye on. If it looks strange, it may be take a step back, get someone else involved, another set of eyes, and read the email. And then when in doubt, pick up the phone and make a call to a known number. So with that,
Matt, that's one thing I was going to mention later on, but speed is very important in this too. The quick, if it feels in your gut that there's something wrong, don't be afraid to call us, to ask us for help. That's what we're here for. We want to prevent it just as much as you want to prevent it. So if you have that just gut feeling that something's off, call us and we can start shutting things down and try to prevent things from happening at that point.
absolutely. Absolutely. We deal with it every day, and we understand that customers may not. So if there are things that you're worried about, we're certainly willing to help, and we've got staff here to do it. And with that, we will hand it over to Neil, our CTO for BOS.
Sure. Hey, guys. So kind of echo the things that Matt talked about. The biggest thing, we're going to go through pieces of emails mostly, but this can happen with text, with phone calls, all that kind of stuff. The biggest thing I want to convey to you guys, especially as business people, is not everyone in your organization, nor you, have to be an expert at picking out these frauds. They're not. It's always changing. You don't have to be an expert. What we boil it down to here at the bank, and what I tell our employees every couple of weeks, when we talk about this, is you just have to decide, is this interaction strange for me? is this something that I'm not used to? Because there's all kinds of things, we'll talk about these little red flags and things. There's all kinds of them that can be legitimate. There's a real example that you can point out to in your business practices that, oh, hey, I deal with this vendor and they're out of the country, so they always use crazy words, or their structure isn't right. That's one of the things we'll hit on. So there may be some of these things that are completely legitimate, but the boil down is this interaction strange, or is this different than what I'm used to doing? And if that's the case, your employees, everybody should be okay with saying, I need to slow down, and I want to verify this, as Matt said, either by calling, or if it's a phone call, let's text the owner, or the vendor, however that is. We want to find a path around the interaction that you think is suspicious, using contact information that is good. Don't use a email or phone number in the email that you think is suspicious, because as Matt mentioned, that leads you down the road. The first one there we're going to hit on is intimidation and rushing. This one, it happens a lot, and a lot of these are usually pieces of an interaction. There's very few times that you would just say, okay, here's my one red flag. You're kind of trying to build a case for or against your suspicious interaction. So rushing usually involves things like, if you get an invoice and it's for $1,000, and of course the invoice is due today, otherwise there's a 25% late fee per hour, something ridiculous, right? They're trying to get you to say, oh my gosh, if I don't do this now, I'm going to be hurt later, monetarily or however. So those kind of things, if that's what we say in here, if an interaction gives you the feels like that, we need to slow down, because that's exactly the kind of, I don't have to follow my procedures, I need to do this now kind of thing that really the fraudsters are counting on there for you. One of the examples I would have in here that we've seen in real life is trying to head that kind of verification off. We'll get emails that would say the CEO sends it to somebody else. Hey, I need you to send out this wire, but I'm going into a meeting, or I'm going to a funeral, or some reason that they can't be contacted for that verification, or some reason why you need to do this right this second. That's kind of the thought, or the things that you guys should be looking for in those interactions, is if they're already heading off why you can't verify it, big red flag there. We go on there to I think the next one is small mistakes here. These ones are kind of like what we talked about. These are mainly what I see in foreign interactions. If you have a vendor or a customer that it lives in a foreign country, or non-English speaking, or non-first English speaking, that you can kind of see some of these things happen. But mistakes in grammar, mistakes in sentence structure that don't seem to be quite right. Honestly, kindly is my personal red flag word. If we get an email or something like that asks us to kindly do something, usually that's already a red flag for us, and say, you know what, we definitely need to verify this. Again, if you normally interact with a vendor that uses kindly for these things, that's not a red flag word for you. But those kind of things, like I said, is this interaction strange, should be your boil down. If everything seems fine, if I always get an email from this particular vendor every week to wire this money, okay, you probably should still have some procedures there. Again, as the business side, these things that we were talking about, you can work into procedures. But if that's something that always happens, still follow whatever procedures your company or you have put in place for this, but it's not the same level of suspicion as something that's, not something that happens to you all the time. So I think we'll go on to the next one that you guys can read the slides as we go, I'm not going through all that, but it's essentially, we're just talking, right? Request for private or sensitive information. So this is another one of those things where the request here usually isn't directly related. They're not coming after you for something. A lot of times we'll see somebody trying to send wire, or like Matt mentioned, changing that payment information. They're coming for the accounts payable people, or the invoicing people. they're coming for those people to say, I want you to change this information and send it. If they're looking for somebody else, they may still be looking at you for that information. The example here is a CEO or somebody higher in the company asking for information they already know. Hey, they send you email. Hey, who's our people that writes the checks? Well, you're the CEO, you know it's Stacy, right? She's worked here for 12 years. That's weird. Or thing that we've seen recently here too is asking for two-factor codes. A lot of this multi-factor authentication that Brad mentions, that Matt mentions, if they get your password or can guess your password and they want to get into your email or want to get into this payroll system and there's a two-factor code, they could ask you for it and say, hey, you know what? I'm the CEO. I'm looking for your two-factor code. What is it right now? That would be weird. There's no reason for that. And there's no reason they would need something like that, except for if they're trying to break into your account. So that's the deal. Those kinds of things, red flags. I know that those are kind of very specific examples, but again, your business, you would know what's normal for somebody like CEO or somebody in accounts payable to know and what they would ask. And if they would ask something that they already know or already should know, right? That's not something that we want to go down there. The next one is request to open email attachments. So this one again is a very tricky one because we use email a lot. We send attachments all the time. But again, this is a piece of a red flag or a piece of this that you should be looking at in addition to all these other things we're talking about. So say you get an email from a vendor that normally just attaches an invoice or maybe puts the invoice number in the body of the message, say, hey, you owe me $500 for the staplers that you bought for me. And now all of a sudden they say, hey, go to this email attachment to find out what your invoice is. It needs to be paid today, super urgent. All those things build up. And then what we've seen before here, and sometimes the attachments, they will have it'll be an encrypted attachment, and you'll have to go to another site to log in. Again, those are all things that are very strange if you've not done that before and not interacted with that company before. So again, those things are usually more for account taking over your email, that kind of stuff, to get them deeper into the company and make it easier for these other types of check fraud and that kind of stuff to happen, because that other verification steps that Matt's talking about, Brad's talking about, those are way easier if you have control over someone's account. It's a lot harder to distinguish that stuff if you are sending from the legitimate account. So those are the kind of things we want to make sure we're definitely avoiding.
And Neil, isn't there, I know that I've seen it a lot. It's texting and phone, fraud is on the rise, where they're trying to get us through the text feature, because everyone now, I've got a lot of customers like to just communicate via text, and there's always those hyperlinks in there. Is that, something that you've been seeing too?
Absolutely. And I think that's one of our next ones actually, but go ahead, Ashley.
We have a question from the chat. Is there a way to block these types of emails from coming through our server?
That depends. So what I would do there is, if you get with your IT department or your email provider, there are definitely rules that you could put in to stop these kind of attachments. So one of the things that we do here at the bank is you can encrypt PDFs, put a password on it. That has led us down some wrong roads before, where they've got, customers or vendors, have gotten their email hacked, and they've sent us attachments like that say, hey, you know what, this is a encrypted attachment, here's the password, jump in there, and it's a fraudulent attachment, again, sending you off somewhere else to log in. The problem is with encrypted attachments, a lot of scanners cannot read those, right? They're encrypted, so it's secure in that the data in there cannot be read by scanners and that kind of stuff. So for us, if we see an encrypted attachment, we hold the email and say, hey, you know what? You as an employee need to get with IT. Are you super sure you recognize this? Just as another thing like that. So there are definitely ways to do things like that, where you have your email security scan those attachments, or if they can't, you can hold them. But it really depends on what your IT and your mail system is capable of. But yes, that is something that I would look at to reduce that risk for you if you're willing to accept the potential false positives and the legitimate traffic that gets stopped there. So all these things are trade-offs, right?
Neil, I got a question.
Yeah.
If a business doesn't have an IT department, where can they turn to get that assistance? They can, of course, buy the proper softwares and have, a consultant, but is there anywhere they can turn for that day, that moment to help them out in that concern?
Yeah, so kind of like insurance, right? IT is hard to pull up right when you need it. So I would say definitely if you're a smaller business, that kind of thing, you should definitely look around for contract or consultant people. There are definitely people around. I'm not specifically for Springfield because we reach a large area with our bank now, but there are definitely consultants around. I know, for really low level stuff, we've got the bigger box stores that have tech departments that can help you out with some of that stuff. But especially if you're looking for security related help, that kind of thing, you really want to go with a dedicated IT company. And there are some around there that do provide those outsourced services. But again, you want to engage them now if you feel like you're going to need them, because in the middle of something happening, everybody's tensions are going to be high, and it's really hard to get that kind of expert help if they don't know what your system's about, and then your first interaction with them is high stress. So I would definitely recommend if you're getting to the point where you feel like, hey, you know what, I almost could use an IT person, or I'm not really sure how all this email stuff works, definitely reach out to somebody like that and figure out with them what the best thing for you is.
So it's like getting an attorney or an accountant. You don't have to pay them until you use those services.
Depends, right? Everybody does things a little different, but in general, a lot of those IT places are kind of a on-call place where you would use them as you need them. But again, getting that set up initially is going to be the real key to have actually them understanding your environment and really being able to help you.
Cool.
Yeah, and I think too, it goes back to some of those best practices as well, as far as, was I expecting an email with an attachment? Do I know the sender? Or was this out of the blue? Is this strange? And then again, if you don't have that IT service available, picking up the phone again, the extra 5 minutes to make a call can help save your organization from opening up something that, could be devastating. So taking that extra time, like we said, the urgency, things can wait when it comes to protecting your business.
Absolutely. I think the next one there is the actual hyperlinks that we're going to here. So this is one that we see is rising a lot, and Brad mentioned that here. Go next. Here's an example of our a text message that I think I got. Actually, I submitted this one for this slide, so good deal there. But this one's specifically Netflix. But here's the deal. We've had customers, we've had vendors go down this road, not necessarily for Netflix, but they say, hey, your account's suspended, or that kind of stuff. Again, the urgency and the consequences. But you got this from a text, and they want to go down this hyperlink, and we've seen bad things happen there where people lost a lot of money by being duped into these hyperlinks. So the thing I would say there is, especially if you're not sure that this is a legitimate text message, whatever organization they pretend to be, Netflix or maybe your healthcare provider, I get those sometimes too, those kind of things, call up that organization. Go to their website. Don't worry about what the text message says. Again, find a way around that. And especially your employees, as your business, this should be one of those procedures, policies. Say, hey, if you get a text message saying, we're not interested, go around that.
We have a question in the chat. Shouldn't the web address be a tip-off?
The web address definitely is a tip-off. And it kind of goes back to what I said there at the beginning. Having people look at those things, if they feel comfortable and capable, absolutely, because that's another one of those things that you can use to build a case. Is this legitimate or not? But at the very least, we want to just be able to say, is this strange? So if you don't overwhelm employees, everyone's got employees or people that they know of that they just have a hard time getting that, hard time remembering what they're supposed to be looking at, or if this makes sense that the web address is not in this case, Netflix, or what, was Netflix there? Some people just have a really hard time with that. So at the very minimum, we want to be able to say, if this is weird, if if this is not what you think you should be doing, let's not do it. Let's find a way around that. And like I said, policies, maybe that's where you say, hey, you know what? Everybody in this company, I will never text you. Let's say you're the CEO or, somebody that is managing people. I will never text you to send a wire. That's it. And everybody in the company agrees, no texting. So that way, if there is one, they don't have to look at the web address. They don't have to look at all that. They know that we all agreed, no texting. So if that happens, they already know it's fraud. So that's the kind of, like I said, those policy procedures to be thinking about as you as a business person to put in place to really head this off at the pass. Again, I kind of mentioned with the URLs and that kind of stuff, it's always better to go to the site, go to your vendor, call them with their main number that to get around that kind of stuff. It could be that the text is legitimate, and again, as you build that habit with them, maybe that company does do texting and they do that, hey, click on this link to do things, and maybe you want your business to be able to do that. But let's build that trust with that as we go. I would still be cautious of that going down the road, but like I said, with all these things, there are legitimate cases for everything. But I think now we're going to switch back over to Matt here or Justin for the products that they want to talk about that maybe can help us from the bank side, help you guys as business customers.
Yeah, a lot of great information. Hopefully you guys are taking it all in, taking notes. This is something that we're all used to on a daily basis. We combat fraud literally 24/7, 365 days a year. Neil's group does a great job at keeping us educated in a proactive way so that we're not having to react suddenly because something bad happened. And essentially, we need our customers to do the same thing. So what can you guys do to be proactive? We do have a lot of products and services within our walls of the bank. A lot of them are free services. Most of them are free services. And we want to be able to explain those to you and get you guys going on those. So first things first here on the next slide is we're gonna have you update your password, and it's good to update your password on a regular basis. I can't tell you how many times we get calls. Matt oversees our call center of people, hey, I forgot my password, so we can reset your password. But we have to do it with all of our systems here at the bank, monthly, sometimes quarterly, depending on the service. But update those passwords, make them a challenging password, nothing simple that somebody can just guess. Make sure there's plenty of different characters, numbers, letters, all that good stuff. Our cash management software, both on the e-banking and the e-business side, allows you to set alerts and notifications for whatever amount that you want to set. If you're sending checks, wires, ACHs, it doesn't matter. There's a very robust alert and notification system within our cash management platforms.
I want to jump in there for just a second there, Justin. Justin talked about the passwords. That's definitely still a great recommendation to change those. You may see some conflicting information there from places like NIST or that kind of thing that are recommending longer password change times. I would just want to point out that those longer password change times are only if you are also enabling two-factor on this account, which I would highly recommend for any account you can. Your Facebook, your Gmail, your Netflix, all of those things. If they offer two-factor, I would recommend putting it on there. That would, NIST is talking about keeping that password time longer, but especially if that's not an account you can have two-factor on, you definitely want to change that regularly so that way nobody is guessing that or sniping it off from somewhere else. Just as a point of clarification.
Yeah, and since you brought up the two-factor, multi-factor authentication, it's so important. We've got facial recognition, we've got fingerprint, login capabilities. We've got tokenized access through our e-business. So technically you can't send any type of money out of the account unless you have a randomized 8-digit number plus your 4-digit PIN. It'd be very hard for a fraudster to get in there. I'm not saying impossible, but using these extra layers of security is crucial. And I think it's just going to be more prevalent as we move into the future.
Justin, on the multi-factor authentication, dual authentication, your insurance carriers are gonna expect you to have that. Just because the bank requires you to do it and some of your pay processors, they're more worried about your own computer system. You accessing your system is what they're talking about, the multi-factor authentication, when it comes to their cyber policy. So don't have a false sense of, all right, we do this because of our banking. Yes, you do it for that, but that's not the question they're asking. They're asking you to access your personal system. Are you taking multi-factor authentication and doing those fingerprints or whatever the second step of authenticating you're there is got to be present, or there's no coverage. So that's very, very important to be aware of. If it's not there, there are services out there that you can pay for. And there's actually cyber policies that we sell that will actually get it into your system so you can utilize their multi-factor, because that's their firewall. They don't want to pay a claim, so they will basically put it installed into your system, and you can utilize their multi-factor authentication so you can access that system safely for all your staff. So keep that in mind. If it's not present, there's no coverage on most policies now today.
Very good.
Sorry.
So no, please. So yeah, just moving along in the slide here, customize and dual controls, authorization and verification processes. You know, within your own company, find a way to set up some policies and procedures of how you're going to do things. And we can customize things on our end. We can give you all the products and services that we have, but then internally you have to have a customized policies and procedures routine that you go through when you are sending money. For example, every customer that does wires through the Bank of Springfield, we have a wire agreement in place. And within that wire agreement, we have authorized representatives of that business that can initiate a wire or verify a wire at certain numbers. And we have our policies and procedures within the bank of what we're going to do on our end. So just making sure that you have those things in place. We're happy to help you with those policies and procedures. We can't write them for you, but you can certainly work with us to develop those. Dual controls, obviously, we mentioned, two people signing off on checks. If you're sending an ACH payment, you can have one person log in with a multi-factor access to initiate the ACH, and then another person has to go in with the multi-factor access to actually approve it. These are the kinds of checks and balances that we have to have in place. As Brad mentioned, even for the insurance to pay. Positive Pay is a free product that we want you to use if you're willing to just take the extra 5 minutes that it would take to upload that. Positive Pay is a check prevention product. Essentially what we're asking you to do is when you're sending checks out, you are going to upload that list of checks that have the date, the payee, the amount, the check number. You're going to upload a file into our cash management software. And we're going to be able to verify those checks with you before we pay. If it's on the list, we'll go ahead and pay it. But if something doesn't match, for example, if a check is intercepted and $1,000 was changed into $10,000, we're going to call you with the numbers that we have on file and say, hey, you said that you were paying this person $1,000, but it's coming through trying to get cashed at $10,000. We can return that check and prevent that from being fraud. Maybe it was a typo on your end and you really did mean to send 10,000. Well, then we'll verify that with you at the time and pay it if you tell us it's okay to pay. What we are going to see in the near future next year, that Positive Pay is going to go to an ACH Positive Pay as well, and that is coming down the pipeline, correct, Matt?
Yes.
I would expect mid 2023 to end of 2023, depending on how fast our processor can get us upgraded. But that's going to be, a Positive Pay file for checks and for ACHs and vendors that you're paying electronically. We recommend a yearly review. That's one important thing that we were trying to do more of, get in front of our customers, touch them more on a regular basis, and just make sure that we do have updated information on file, address changes, signer information on the checks. Hopefully our customers are always doing a good job of keeping us updated, but we're going to be proactive on our end to reach out to you and schedule that review and make sure, hey, are these the correct phone numbers? Is your wire agreement updated? Are the signers on your account correct? All those things, making sure that if there are any new products and services that we're offering, that you're aware of those products and services. We'll talk to you about the current trends of fraud. We would love to meet with you. If you're open to a meeting, we'd love to meet with you. And I know Neil's done this with some of our other customers, bringing an IT person to just consult with you on that end. We just want to do what's best for our customers, because if you're protecting yourselves and we're doing what we can, it's a group effort, it's a team effort. I think we're all going to be on the same page.
Yep.
But yeah, and then Brad's got a few things that he wants to hit on as far as insurance products.
Thanks, Justin. So one thing that gets overlooked a lot of time is business income. So business income, most people think of it as if my building gets knocked down, that will help me pay for my staffing, that loss of revenue during that time while I'm down. Well, unfortunately, if there's a cyber attack or a very large crime attack, you're not going to have business income typically on your policy, just because it says it has to be specifically spelled out in your policy form. That's why it's important to have a specific policy dedicated to it. Also, have a backup plan. The most common attacks that we're seeing right now is social engineering and ransomware. And typically, I think it's around 3 weeks right now. So just assume you're down for 2 to 3 weeks and you're a manufacturer, and all your manufacturing equipment requires you to use some form of your computer system, and they hold you hostage for 3 weeks. Can you survive that 3 weeks being down? That's something you need to be prepared for. Do you have a backup option somewhere? And that's really those things that you need to think of now before disaster hits, because there's more than likely not an adequate coverage for business income. And then where else can you turn? Do you have a backup plan? Do you have a relationship out in the industry that will fill that gap for you so your reputational loss is not there? Also, I've said it a few times, but have your agents or have us give you a full cyber and crime policy. A lot of carriers call it a wrap policy, and that'll also include employment practices liability, some professional liability. It has a whole robust coverage just tailored for your industry, whatever that industry may be. Now, it does cost a little more, but it's going to cover the actual disaster that's going to occur. We all think about, the weather and, getting hit by the physical claim, but more than likely, this is the next claim that you will occur. And this is your largest threat. Also, even if you do have a good policy in place that is a monoline cyber or a monoline crime, you may not have adequate limits for what the real risk is now today. The cost to handle a breach is substantially increased. So if you are of a real substantial size, let's say you have 5 million in sales or greater, you should be looking at anywhere from a $2 to $5 million liability limit. If you don't have that, you may not be adequately positioned to protect your business. And lastly, it would only take us 15 minutes to get you a full quote in most case scenarios, and just get you an indication of what these are going to cost you. It takes probably about 15 to 20 total questions, and we'd be happy to talk to you about it sometime. I think, was there anything else we wanted to touch on?
No, I think it's a good time for any final comments. Was there any more questions that came through, actually?
Yes. What is the typical cost of a crime and cyber policy for businesses?
Okay, I'll take that. Typically, it depends on a few factors. The most common factor is, what is your annual sales? Another factor is, what is your industry? And then also, what is your customer base? How many client files do you have? So of course, the bank here, we have a large amount of accounts, so ours should be substantially higher than just a manufacturer or a storefront that just has regular customers coming in the doors. It all depends on a lot of those factors. But just to give you a few examples, let's say you want a $1 million cyber policy and you have 10 million in sales and you're in the manufacturing industry. Right now, we're seeing around $2,000 to $4,000 in place. Now, there are other factors that come into play, but that's what the industry is. Now, if you're not-for-profit with that same the sales of 10 million, you can typically see, because of the higher customer base, that they have a lot more files in place on personal information, it's gonna be around $5,000 to $8,000. And unfortunately, we're in a very hard market and we're seeing around 25 to 30% increase for no losses. That's just the industry. They're trying to adjust to the inflation. And that's just kind of the cost of it right now. So if you're looking to save on your cyber policy, it's probably not the right time because there's going to be an increase, but it's about the proper coverages to protect your business. Is there any other
Any
questions?
other questions, Ashley? Okay. Well, great. So any other comments, Neil, Matt?
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate that it's a community thing that we are trying to combat. You know, anytime there's fraud and money lost, those things don't go into playgrounds and food banks and things. They go into drugs and crime, and it's just a revolving door when that happens. So I know some of these things, when you fall victim, whether personally or as a business, can be embarrassing, quite frankly, but I think it's important to share experiences that you have or that you've seen. That way people are aware of what's going on, what the tricks are out there that scammers are using. So it just takes everyone to be diligent, take a little bit extra time, slow down, use trusted people as a resource. And, you know, as a bank, we're always here to help. So just want everyone to know that.
Very good. Neil, anything?
Nope, I think we're good.
Very good. Well, we want to thank everybody for joining us today. We're going to do these as often as we can. And, you know, though it may seem, you know, like you've heard it before, we're going to try to update you on current trends, products and services. Most of our customers, you know, that get hit with fraud, you know, they haven't sat through some of these, you know, seminars or webinars. They typically don't act until it happens to them. And this is our attempt to get that information in front of them to try to get them to act now. And not saying you have to go out and buy a huge crime policy from Brad on the insurance world, but make sure you're knowing before, you're thinking ahead. And we just want to thank you all. Ashlyn, thank you for our BOS marketing team for your help today. And until the next time, thanks for joining.